in this case concerning the JVIT-18 pandemic. And for 20 minutes ahead, I will address our first and second submission, and the next agent, Ayu Anggraini, will deliver our third and fourth submission. In this first submission, claimed run-of-style violate international law by applying its anti-regulation to Aprepuya and thus obligates to compensate it for the economic losses. Your Excellencies, foregoing reason, I bring to argument the first run-of-style violate international law by did not report to the WHO immediately and discriminated Aprepuyan of their anti-regulation and travel restrictions. And the second point, run-of-style must compensate the economic losses that run-of-style has caused to Aprepuyan. May it please the court, I will begin in this first submission. This issue appear when run-of-style met the anti-regulation and travel restriction regarding to the JVIT-18 pandemic and put Aprepuya on their high-risk countries list, while in Aprepuya only have 9 confirmed cases. Run-of-style assumed for took that action because to prevent their citizens from the virus, but on the other hand, that gave negative impact to Aprepuya's economic, especially in the tourism sector. Hence, this is the pioneer why run-of-style violate international law and must compensate of it. Your Excellencies, run-of-style did not report to the WHO first about their anti-regulation. This is contrary with Article 63 in WHO Constitution, where each party has to report anything about law, regulation, statistic promptly to the WHO first, and strengthened again in Article 3 of International Health Regulation, where emphasized that every state, if have any health emergency, they have to consult the WHO to get the decision and get the best recommendation what action must taken of its country. And also support by internationally sanitary convention, everything that taken by state, such as a statistic about plague or pandemic, they have to notify promptly to the WHO first. Your Excellencies, regarding on the previous regulation, run-of-style did not report anything about their anti-regulation. They notified it after they implemented. So run-of-style did not respect the international law and shall be referred to the International Court of Justice as a consequence not honoring this constitution. This is emphasized in Article 75 of WHO Constitution. And moreover, Your Excellencies, this is excessive measure of run-of-style, while in Aprepuya only have nine confirmed cases in Aprepuya. Precisely in the third section of run-of-style's anti-regulation states that the country will add to that list if there is 50 minimal cases in the country. So we can conclude that run-of-style has violated their own regulation, and because of this, Aprepuya has asked to run-of-style in good faith to remove Aprepuya from the high-risk countries list, but run-of-style still did not want to do that, Your Excellencies. So run-of-style teman not honored the principle of good faith, but did not want to remove Aprepuya from their high-risk countries list. Going to the second sub-point, run-of-style discriminated Aprepuyan with their anti-regulation and travel restrictions.
Before you move to your second point, I would like to know, can you provide me any basis to which extent that WHO can involve during the country health emergency, or what is the basis that WHO can pass over national regulation? Why do you say that? Is it the entry regulation that should be reported, while is it really the entry regulation that should be reported to the WHO, or is it the case or the events of the health crisis that happen inside of the country that should be reported to WHO?
Yes, Your Excellencies, I understand your concern. Yes, every regulation, statistic, or laws that over about health or public emergency have to report to the WHO first, and this is really based on Article 63 in the 63 in WHO Constitution and Article 3 of International Health Regulation, where everything that's taken by a state about plague or pandemic, they have to notify the WHO Constitution, and both it's all about the circumstances in the state itself or about the regulation itself. May I proceed my argument? In the second, in the second subpoint, run of style discriminated Afro-Peruvian with their entry regulation and travel restrictions. Your Excellencies, we know 40% in Afro-Peruvian, except run of style who want to travel to Afro-Peruvian, they have to transit in Bukpade Airport, which is in run of style's territory. And moreover, in fourth section of run of style's entry regulation states that every individual who transit at one of the run of style airport, they have to deem this regulation. Hence, run of style indirectly has limited appropriate rights as a country, because especially in the economic aspect, which is the biggest vehicle income of the state itself. And furthermore, according to the travel bans, this is contradict with Article 13 in Declaration of Human Rights and Article 3 of IHR, where everyone has right to live or enter any country. And in the United Nations World Tourism Organization, it states that tourism is important contribution vehicle for individual and also for the state, Your Excellencies. And if run of style authors to strengthen their entry regulation, why they don't do the test to detect the JAVID virus, such as rapid PCR or antigen that could be detect if the person get the virus or not, because prohibition of entering or leaving a country without clear reason or lack or evidence, this is a form of discrimination against Afro-Peruvian itself, Your Excellencies. Your Excellencies, Your Excellencies, going to the second point, run of style must compensate the economic losses that run of style has caused to Afro-Peruvian. This is under Article 43 IHR state that all WHO member in health measure context, each state shall not do the restrictive of international traffic. Your Excellencies, the Ramsay did not obey the World Health Organization recommendation, and as described in Article 15 of IHR, Ramsay must give the effectiveness of public health measures such public health advice that did by Your Excellencies, going to the second sub point, Ramsay also gives the impact to appropriate territory. This is under Article 31 in responsibility of state for International Wrongful Act. The run of style has responsibility to give a reparation as the result of travel restriction and give negative impact and bad influence to the economic losses of Papua. So run of style must compensate over 130 million euro as a form of responsibility to Papua. This is in compliance with the case of Corfu Channel case, where there's a bomb trap after the World War in Albania's water, and British warship suffered damage while passing through the Corfu Channel in 1946, and all crew members were killed. For causing harm to the Britain, the court ordered Albania to compensate about 844,000 euro expenses. There's a correlation between that case to run of style and Papua. Whatever is done by a territorial country, which is run of style, if it gives negative impact or bad influence to the other country, then the injured country, which is Papua, they has the right to get a restitution or compensation from a country that has committed an act of violating international law as a form of their responsibility, Your Excellencies. May I proceed going to the second submission?
I have a question here that it's clearly written that you said that run of style did not do obligation as WHO's recommendation. So is there any basis for this that WHO recommendation should be an obligation for a country, or how far is it can bind a country to so that they okay, wait, I'm sorry, did not, because as what I can see is that they did not obey, as they are really they have to follow this recommendation. So it's like sorry, you get my point or not?
Okay, may I clarify your comment, Your Excellencies?
I hope you can get it.
Even if the WHO recommendation is so low, but consider run of style and Apropria is each member of WHO constitution, so each party has to deem this recommendation, because the recommendation has the good purpose and did not give the negative impact or bad influence to the international community. And for instance, such as UNESCO, even if the content is only the recommendation, but as long as the purpose of that convention and the recommendation it's good and for the better life for the international community, so the party have to deem this regulation. And even if there's a country that don't one of its member, it still have to be it still have to be deemed this recommendation and regulation, uh, even the country itself did not ratify this WHO Constitution, Your Excellencies. May I continue my argument? Going to the second submission. In this claim, Rana Style violate international law by failing to hand over Ms. Kembak Verman to the appropriate authorities. Your Excellencies, may I bring on the table two of arguments. The first, action to accept Ms. Verman by Rana Style Consular is indeed violating international law. And the second point, Ms. Kembak Verman is not fit with the criteria to be called as a refugee or asylum seeker. This issue emerged when there's one of the employees in the NBL named Ms. Kembak Verman reported about the cases of COVID-19 with her fake social media, so that she has been a suspect of a breach of a non-disclosure agreement in appropriate laboratory. Hence, Ms. Verman visited Ranofstay's consular to grant it an asylum, and Ranofstay refused to hand over Ms. Verman to the appropriate authorities. So this is the pioneer why Ranofstay violated international law by not surrender Ms. Verman. Your Excellencies, in this first point, Ms. Kembak Verman is the fugitive from the justice of Aprepuya, and there is no good faith and reciprocity by Ranofstay to surrender Ms. Verman. Your Excellencies, Ms. Kembak Verman, with her own free will and consciousness, committed her domestic law by bound the non-disclosure agreement, and Aprepuya has formally asked for her extradition with the procedure as how international law regulated. As known, there is no rule of international law which prevents the states from extradite their citizens from the other country, and in many practice states, national legislation provides for the possibility for extradition without pre-existing the agreement itself. For instance, in Maria Pauline Lumowa case, where she is committed 1.7 trillion rupiah bank burglary in Indonesia, she escaped from Indonesia to Serbia and get an extradition because Indonesian government has been cooperative with Serbia's Interpol police to hand over her to Indonesia's authorities, Your Excellencies. And even between Indonesia and Serbia did not pre-exist in the agreement about extradition first, the Maria Pauline Lumowa it still can be to extradite to their origin state, which is Indonesia, Your Excellencies. So there's a correlation between that case to this Ms. Verman case, where Ranofsky has to do the reciprocity by hand over Ms. Verman to the appropriate authorities. But clearly, those principles was not shown by the Ranofsky or Excellencies. And going to the second subpoint, the practice in the case of granting asylum to individual who comes in singly, either because of political persecution or having committed a common crime, the consideration that must taken by a receiving state is what would be the fate if the person puts back to their origin state. Because as known, asylum is only given to the people who is possible being sentenced to death or going to get a cruel punishment in their origin state. And we can conclude that Ms. Verman is not being sentenced to death or being subjected to a degrading and cruel punishment. And also, Ranofsky did not have any obligation to accepting Ms. Verman because she is still under investigation of Aprepuya itself. And Ranofsky granting her asylum is clearly interfering Aprepuya's domestic affairs, Your Excellencies.
Yes, based on what that you say, the Miss Formon is under investigation because as far as we know, here she is not yet under any investigations. Is it that correct in your in this all that you write. Until now she is not under the investigation yet. And then I want to ask that under what that you say just now that she already under investigation.
Yes, Your Excellencies, I understand your concern. Ms. Verman is clearly a fugitive in Apreplia's country because she breached a non-disclosure agreement in laboratory of Apreplia. And in that agreement, in the non-disclosure agreement, it states that if the party or the envoy breach this agreement, they could be a suspect of the fugitive in Apreplia. So why the country state that she was still under investigation of Apreplia's authorities, Your Excellencies? May I proceed my argument? Thank you.
Can you more elaborate about the breach of the suspect or non-disclosure agreement? Because you state that uh, she's not she's under investigation, right? Can you more elaborate about the NDA, the breach suspect?
Thank you, Your Excellencies. I understand your concern. The breach of non-disclosure agreement, it's if the envoy in the laboratory breach or spoke or anything that happened in that laboratory. So this is the non-disclosure agreement that bound to every invoice in NBL laboratory in Apreplia. May I proceed my argument?
You shall proceed.
Going to the third subpoint, asylum in the premises of a diplomatic mission based on Article 55, Paragraph 1 VCCR. As a sending state, which is Rano Stayo, ought to enjoy the privilege and immunities and have to respect the law and regulation of the receiving state, which is Apreplia. And also Rano Stayo, as a sending state, have a duty not to interfere the internal affairs in Apreplia. And strengthened in paragraph 2, where the consular premises shall not be used with incompatible manner of the exercise of consular functions, such as granting an asylum, Your Excellencies. Thus, Ramstein clearly violated this international agreement and therefore should expel Ms. Berman to the appropriate authorities. And because he is not fit with the criteria to be called as asylum or refugee, that should be protected by the other country, Your Excellencies. And because the right of asylum in the premises of a diplomatic mission does not exist in international law. Thus, what Ranofsky did by accept Ms. Verman, it has no legal basis and contradict with the international law, especially in Article 55, Paragraph 2 in VCCR. Excellencies. Going to the fourth subpoint, the right of receiving state to terminate diplomatic asylum do not categorize asylum as one of the recognized diplomatic mission or consular function. So run of the action is not only interfering appropriate state affairs, but also operate their consular outside of its function that was already regulated by international law, and therefore run of style must be responsible to the International Court of Justice, Your Excellencies. And going to the second point, Ms. Kambat Verman is not fit with the criteria to be called as asylum or refugee seeker. Allow me to explain what the definition of political offense itself. Political offense is that exclusive aimed to the state or against political system and directly injure the government, such as do the treason, sedition, or spionage that could be threatened the existence, welfare, and security of the country itself. And Ms. Berman is clearly commits common crime, and because we consider the health of people that spoke by Ms. Berman to that fake social media it's not a state secret. So everyone, it's a responsibility of state because everyone has the right to health and prosperity life based on Article 25 in the Declaration of Human Rights. Your Excellencies, for the foregoing reason, applicant respectfully requests that the court find its favor to judge and declare that run of style violate international law by applying its regulation must compensate of the resulting economic losses and run of Stayo in valid international law by resisting to hand over Ms. Roman to the authorities. Thank you, Your Excellencies.
Okay. So we would like to hear the second applicant.
Thank you, Your Excellencies. Very good afternoon, Your Excellencies, Mr. President, and the agent of the Democratic State of Ranopsayu. My name is Ayu Anggraini, and I have the honor to appearing before this court appealing on behalf of applicant, the United Republic of Aprilia. Your Excellencies, I will be representing the case concerning COVID-19 pandemic. Your Excellencies, I will be delivering the third submission regarding to the court may not exercise jurisdiction over Ranopsayo's counterclaim concerning to the maintained airways aircraft. And for the fourth submission regarding to, even if where the court has jurisdiction, Aprilia did not violate international law by shooting down the maintained airways aircraft. Your Excellencies, with your permission, may I please the court. I will begin from our third submission. In this submission, I will be dealing with two main points. Firstly, about the court may not exercise jurisdiction over Ranopsayo's contest claim based on the Aprilia's declaration reservation on the declaration of Aprilia and Ranopsayo 7 January 2002 and 10 March 2003. And for the second main points regarding to the maintained airways aircraft dispute is the domestic jurisdiction of the United Republic of Aprilia. Your Excellencies, the problem started in the early morning of 26 June 2008 when a maintained airways aircraft crashed into a forest of the Aprilian authorities. A maintained airways aircraft is a low-cost charter airline privately owned by Aprilia National. These aircraft are registered in the Aprilia's authorities. Your Excellencies, the maintained airways aircraft are shot down by Aprilia military authorities to prevent a tragedy in the surveillance of the attack of the FOG, known as the Organization of the Terrorists. Your Excellencies, the maintained airways aircraft had taken off from the Segura airport without authorization, and this maintained airways aircraft also flying illegally toward the capital city of the Aprilia. And as known, the passenger inside it are killed as known Mrs. Campbell Portman and Mrs. Ye as the pilot. Both of them are the Aprilia nationality, Your Excellencies. And on 16 July 2018, Ranopsayo notified the court about the wish to file a counterclaim against Aprilia and asserting that the shutdown of the maintained airways are violated international law. And on the 2 days later, Aprilia noted its intention to contest the court exercise of jurisdiction and on the counterclaim. And Aprilia requests that the court adjudge and declare that the International Court of Justice has no jurisdiction over the Ranopsayo's counterclaim concerning to the maintained airways aircraft. Your Excellencies, the court may not exercise jurisdiction over Ranopsayo's counterclaim based on the Aprilia Declaration reservation on the declaration of Aprilia and Ranopsayo on 7 January 2002 and 10 March 2003. However, Aprilia and Ranopsayo had deposited the declaration on 7 January 2002 and 10 March 2003, but Aprilia has reserved the declaration. As known before, that Aprilia and Ranopsayo has respectively deposit declaration with the Secretary General of the United Nations under Article 39, Paragraph 2 of the Statute of the International Court of Justice. But here, the court has no jurisdiction over Ranopsayo's counterclaim because Aprilia has already reserved this declaration, Your Excellencies. This is strengthened under the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties or 1969 on the Article 21D. And as before, Aprilia and Ranopsayo has already binding on the declaration on 7 January 2002 and 10 March 2003, means that this both of Aprilia and Ranopsayo already regarding to the Article 26 of the VVLT in order to the Pacta Sunt Servanda principle, Your Excellencies. As what appropriately request to the court that the court may not exercise jurisdiction over ratified counterclaim concerning to the maintained areas can be justified by legal reasons, Your Excellencies. This is known before in the statement of fact that Aprilia has already reservation this declaration, and on that declaration, it shown that Aprilia uh, will take up their domestic jurisdiction in the dispute regarding to the domestic jurisdiction as what Aprilia determined before. And here, Your Excellencies, as stated by the Prime Minister Haraka on 5 July 2018, I said that their civilian and military authorities has acted promptly and responsibly to prevent a tragedy regarding to the shooting down of the maintained airways aircraft. And here, as the fact, Aprilia said the accident of the shoot down of the maintained airways aircraft are purely their domestic jurisdiction as their determined, Your Excellencies. And reservation as like what Aprilia do is also ever regulate in some cases, just like on the case concerning fisheries jurisdiction between Spain versus Canada. And also, moreover, this kind of reservation have ever regulated in the amendment currently as regulate as in the United Nations, Your Excellencies. Foregoing reason, the maintained airways aircraft dispute is the domestic jurisdiction of the Republic of Aprilia. Your Excellencies, this considered to the Article 2, Paragraph 7 and the Charter of the United Nations, that the domestic jurisdiction, as said, is the competence of a country to fully exercise its sovereignty without interference from the other parties or country, even though international law, Your Excellencies. This is also expanded on the domestic jurisdiction in the provisions of Article 15, Paragraph 8 of the League of Nations. Moreover, Your Excellencies, Aprilia has jurisdiction over the maintained airways air dispute under Article 5 of the Convention for the Suppression of Unlawful Acts Against the Safety of Civil Aviation 1971. This is will be elaborate more that the maintained airways aircraft are crashed in the territory of Aprilia, and also the passenger as the passenger inside the maintained airways aircraft also are the nationality of Aprilia. So, Your Excellencies, we can clearly state it that the dispute on the concerning to the maintained airways aircraft are purely our own domestic jurisdiction, Your Excellencies. And here also, based on the territorial principle, our country as Aprilia also has our own jurisdiction, Your Excellencies. This is regarding to the crimes that happen in our territory, as like what examined in the Lotus case as before, and that relevant facts may be summarized as in the happen in the territory of a state. And Your Excellencies, the dispute concerning maintained airways is fully of the authority of Aprilia, and Aprilia has their own jurisdiction to solve it because it fit for the territorial principle criteria. Also, regarding to solve the dispute, Aprilia is more eligible to solve it than we bring it to the International Court of Justice, Your Excellencies. And also, Aprilia has already make their good faith in order to prevent the tragedy by sending the virtual code to the pilot. But here, Your Excellencies, the pilot didn't respect and the information of our authorities, Your Excellencies. So here we can clearly state that the jurisdiction of the dispute concerning to the maintained airways are not fit for the International Court of Justice, Your Excellencies. And Your Excellencies, on foregoing reason, Aprilia state sovereignty over its airspace. Here, in the common law, as known that rules means whose its soil it is up to the sky. And here we have our own jurisdiction and has our own state sovereignty over our airspace, Your Excellencies. And here, regarding today's run of Sayus counterclaim toward shooting down the maintained airways aircraft are purely the domestic jurisdiction of Aprilia, Your Excellencies. In addition, also
Agent,
states, yes, Your Excellencies.
about the personal against the against the your country interest for the crash of the plane. Here, I mean that what kind of legal basis that you use so that you can decide that this is you can decide that the shutdown of this airplane crash that attempting to reach the reign of what's the name that attempting, because here the plane actually attempting to reach another country, but and then what kind of legal basis that you use here to convince that this is kind of your own country interest. This is not the other violative international law.
Yes, Your Excellencies, I understand your concern. Here, the first of our reasons, because Aprilia has already reservation the declaration of Aprilia and Ranapsayo on 7 January 2002 and 10 March 2003. And this is also clarified more with the provision to the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties 1969 Article 2(1)(d). And Your Excellencies, based on our state sovereignty, we have under the Charter of the United Nations, Article 15, Paragraph 8 of the Covenant of League of Nations, and Article 3(b)(c) of the Chicago Convention that give the state that gives a state sovereignty over its airspace. And here we have our authority and our sovereignty to take over this dispute, Your Excellencies. And moreover, Your Excellencies, we also fit for the territorial principle. The first, because the maintained airways are crushed in our nation, in our territories. And for the second, the passenger inside the maintained airways are our appropriate nationality. So this already can be said as the fit for the criteria of the territorial principle. So with all that legal reason, we can clearly say that Aprilia has their own domestic jurisdiction, Your Excellency. May I continue my argument, Your Excellency? Yes, Your Excellency. And here we can clearly say that the International Court of Justice has no jurisdiction over the maintained airways aircraft dispute, Your Excellencies. I will move to our fourth submission regarding to even if the court were to exercise jurisdiction, Aprilia did not violate international law by shooting down the aircraft. Your Excellencies, presently refers to the dispute between the parties Aprilia and Ranapsayo. The court does not have a jurisdiction over Ranapsayo's counterclaim, since Ranapsayo did not have the interest of the incident of the maintained airways aircraft, and Aprilia did not violate international law. And also, Your Excellencies, the maintained airways aircraft was flying illegally, and Aprilia could fail to comply the standard operating procedure, Your Excellencies. Your Excellencies, to our first main points of argument that Aprilia did not violate international law by shooting down the maintained airways aircraft. The incident of maintained airways aircraft was shooting by the military of Aprilia is about domestic jurisdiction of Aprilia, Your Excellencies. Hence, there is no reason Aprilia violated international law provision, because based on the state sovereignty of Aprilia that has the authority of Aprilia institution, and the secondly, Aprialia's human rights interest, Your Excellencies. Your Excellencies, the international responsibility can't be applied to Aprilia, since there is no reason to an internationally wrongful act of Aprilia entails to its international responsibility that commit by the Aprilia as the case of the Maintain Airways aircraft. Your Excellencies, moreover, in the convention relating to the regulation of aerial navigation on the Article 1 that regulate complete and exclusive sovereignty over the airspace above its territory. In turn, Article 1 of the Chicago Convention that state the contracting state recognizes that every state has complete and exclusive sovereignty over the airspace above its territory. This similar regulation can be also be found in the Libero America Convention on the 1st October 1929 and the Pan America Convention of 20 December 1928, Your Excellencies. Your Excellencies, here, each contracting state may be, for reasons of the military necessity or public safety, restrict to prohibit uniformly the aircraft of other states from flying over the areas of its territory. Your Excellencies, here the authorities of the Aprilia's military has the right to protect and to prevent the tragedy in order to the FOG's attack, Your Excellencies. And here also, yes, Your
Yeah.
Excellencies.
Are you trying to say here that every alien airplane coming to your country that you don't know, your military can just shoot them? Is there any procedure that probably can support your arguments?
Yes, Your Excellencies, I understand your concern. Here, our military authorities, as before, already give and send the visual code to the pilot of Mrs. He of, inside the Maintain Airways aircraft. But here, there are problem in the Maintain Airways aircraft, so they cannot serve the information that our authorities already sent to the pilot. And here, our military also has complied to the operative standard procedure in order to prevent the shooting down of the Maintain Airways aircraft. But still, the Maintain Airways aircraft are still flying towards our capital city. And also before, there are the attack of the FOGs as before in the statement of fact that they said that they will attack both of country, including Ranop Sayo and Aprilia. So here we assume and we also protect our civilian to the FOG's terrorist attack, Your Excellencies. So here our military authorities need to take their first step in order to shoot down the Maintain Airways, Your Excellencies.
Is there any proof that that show whether these civilian airplane have a good faith to answer your communication from the military, or how is it? How can you prove that they don't? Maybe they didn't want to tell you that here we are civilians, we want to contact you, but is there any evidence that that probably there is a technical problem or something else happening?
Yes, Your Excellency, I understand your concern. Here, before we between Aprilia and Ranap Sayo also already do the investigation by the ILSA in order to investigate the Maintain Airways aircraft shooting down the Maintain Airways aircraft, Your Excellencies. And here, based on the recorded of the black box, we already find the fact that the Maintain Airways aircraft are has the problem in order to the radio communication, and based on that fact, we also already send the visual code to the Aprilia. But as in the fact, we know that we can prove the Maintain Airways aircraft has the problem in the inside the aircraft, Your Excellency. And Your Excellencies, beside Aprepulia already complies the international procedure of the International Civil Aviation, the maintained airways aircraft was flying illegally under the Chicago Convention on the International Civil Aviation 1944, Your Excellency. And here, Aprepulia also already has good faith to comply the standard operating procedure, Your Excellency. And here we are declare and ask the International Court of Justice to declare and prove that the Aprepulia did not violate international law by shooting down the aircraft, Your Excellency. Thank you.
May I speak? So regarding what you said about the attack of Aprepulia shutdown, can you more elaborate about uh, what's kind of justification about the civilian and military plane that came to which came to attack Aprepulia state? The
Yes, Your
justification.
Yes, Your Excellencies. Here, the maintained airways aircraft are flying illegally and flying towards our capital city. So here, we assume that inside the maintained airways aircraft, there was a spy mission or the terrorists inside it. So we assume that these maintained airways aircraft are uh, danger to our country, especially to our civilian, your excellencies. So here we justify that the maintained airways aircraft already make the preemptive condition to our country. So our military authorities need to shoot down these maintained airways aircraft, your excellencies.
Are
Thank you, Your
there
Excellency.
Yes. Are there any interest, or because the two people consider in the plan what we call not terrorist, but the person who got chased by the country itself? Are there any on investigation? Are there any consideration about why the the country shut down the maintain airway aircraft, or is just because there's the people who being chased or something like considerate the
Yes,
strange
your
considerate.
Yeah. Yes, Your Excellencies. Here, as before, we don't know that inside the maintained airways aircraft are Mrs. Kendra Foreman and Mrs. Ye as the pilot. And here, as known that Mrs. Kendra Foreman as the asylum of the Democratic State of Ranopstayu. But here, we really don't know about the information towards the passenger inside the maintained airways. So we can assume and we can do another way except shooting down the maintained airways aircraft, because in order to prevent the tragedy of the attack of the terrorists and also to protect and your excellencies. And here, as I said before, that we don't know before that inside the maintained airways aircraft, the passenger is the uh, interest of the Ranopstayu. So here, we can clearly say that the action of shooting down of the maintained airways aircraft by the authorities of military authorities by Aprepulia is uh, did not violate any kind of international law and become our own domestic jurisdiction, Your Excellencies.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellencies.
Mikrofon nyali.
Yeah, we would like to hear from the respondent.
Very good afternoon, Your Excellencies, Agent of Apeplia, and the audience. Mr. President and judges, my name is Arimbi Fajai Furkon. It is such an honor to stand in this virtual court pleading to represent the President of State of Ranostayoo as the respondent in the present case concerning COVID-19 pandemic. I will be delivering the first and second part of respondent submission in the next 20 minutes, and co-agent M. Yusuf Akbar will deliver the third and fourth part of respondent submission for 20 minutes, and will also reserve 3 minutes for rebuttal. May it please the court, the first submission is regarding to Ranostayoo didn't violate international law by applying its entry regulation to Apeplia. And even if it did, it should not be required Apeplia for any claim of economic losses. Your Excellencies, there are three main arguments proving that Ranostayoo didn't violate international law. The first, Ranostayoo didn't violate international law because it was the state sovereignty of Ranostayoo to apply the entry regulation. And the second, Ranostayoo didn't violate international law by applying its entry regulation to Apeplia according to the fundamental rights of person. And the third, Ranostayoo has no obligation to compensate the economic losses of Apeplia because Apeplia didn't notify WHO about the cases of COVID-19 in Apeplia. Your Excellencies, if you don't mind about the structure, may I proceed? Now, with the court permission, I will turn to my very first argument regarding to Ranostayoo didn't violate international law because it was the state sovereignty of Ranostayoo to apply the entry regulation. Your Excellencies, there was confirmed case of COVID-19 pandemic in Apeplia had appeared from the NBL on 10 April 2018. Apeplia didn't report the suspect person and failed handle it. Hence, in order to protect Ranostayoo territory from that virus, Ranostayoo made entry regulation, which include the list of high-risk countries, where Apeplia was added to that list because the failure of handling that virus case in the NBL, and travel restriction as a public desires and interest of Ranostayoo. Your Excellencies, as a global community, Ranostayoo cannot continue to ignore the act of Apeplia to fail handling that virus. It must consider that Ranostayoo didn't violate international law to obey the obligation of state to protect our citizens for that kind of virus. Your Excellencies, the characteristic of the land sovereign state is a competence exclusivity of the state regarding their own territory. The sovereignty of state is same as their land and their airspace regarding to the Article 3 of the Montevideo Convention. And I quote, the political existence of a state is independent of recognized by other state. Your Excellencies, from that article I mentioned before, Ranostayoo has the rights and full sovereignty about how they want to regulate their country based on the regulation, as it fits for the interest and safety of their people, and this is what actually Ranostayoo did regarding to the entry regulation. It was for the safety of Ranostayaan. Your Excellencies, it was also reflected in the Court of Latus case. Every state has their own sovereignty territory, and that statement is also supporting by the reference rate section of Quebec 1998 about the self-determination in the state because it a form of a state integrity. And it's also strengthened by ICJ reports in analysis of Burkina Faso case. It said, I quote, self-determination is concerning to make a decision of people, property, and circumstances of state sovereignty. Your Excellencies, each state has the right to make any regulation depend on their need of nation as good maintained and a capable state to handle what they have to do in their territory. This statement is also supported by the domain reserve doctrine declared by Austin Hobbes, where the state has jurisdiction to do in their capacity and free from obligation and regulation of international law. It also, yes, Your Excellencies.
I understand your point that state sovereignty is very important to determine what you have to do inside of the country. But here is stated that there are only 9 cases in the Segura province, and there were only 2 previous COVID-19 that were not treated quickly. But what makes it such an emergency or what is the importance for your country to have to create such a regulation that you know that you're aware it will impact other countries?
Yes, Your Excellencies. I do know your concern. Your Excellencies, allow me to introduce what our travel restriction regulation in our national law. Your Excellencies, our uh, our entry regulation is the maintained by our government and as to the scientific system, and what the urgency that we add Aprea to our high risk country, because Aprea failed handling that kind of virus in NBL. Your Excellencies, Ranostayo as a state have done a good faith to communicate with the Aprea authorities to handling the virus in NBL, but Aprea authorities didn't do any action to handling that virus, Your Excellencies. And our entry regulation regarding to the 50 minimum 50 cases in 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 other state, that we automatically add the state as a high risk country list in our regulation. But Aprea, yes, Aprea just have 2 cases and 9 cases of COVID-19 in NBL of Aprea. But Your Excellencies, when the cases of COVID-19 in NBL is spread along in NBL or in Aprea, the authorities of Aprea didn't do an action as a legislative action to handling that kind of virus. And moreover, Your Excellencies, there was many Ranostayan did the tourism sector in Segura province itself. So we are as a state have responsible to protect our citizens outside or outside or inside inside Ranostayo itself, Your Excellencies. May I continue? Yes, Your Excellencies. It also the state sovereignty also emphasized under Article 13 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In order what happened on internal state, it's a domestic affairs of the state itself. And it's also strengthened under Article 1 of the Chicago Convention, emphasized about the exclusivity of a sovereign state, that every country has the right to close off the airspace above its territory from the commercial efforts out by the foreign country. Your Excellencies, moving to my second argument, Ranostayo didn't violate international law by applying its entry regulation to Aprea according to the fundamental rights of person. Under Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it explained that the right to live secure and healthy for the person, which that rights are fundamental rights, and that rights also kind of natural law, revert to the rights are universal to international community, Your Excellencies. Moreover, according to the Article 19 of the International Covenant on the Civil and Political Rights, Ranostayo has the right to hold opinions without interference and freedom of expression. Ranostayo has the right to hold opinion and disseminate information of the list of high-risk countries, and Aprea was included in that list because there were 2 previous COVID-19 in NBL were not treated quietly in NBL, and as a result, there were 9 cases in total in Segura province. Ranostayo considered that many Ranostayo citizens vacation there, and Ranostayo tried to protect its citizens both inside and outside of Ranostayo country. It also takes into account international protection and security during a pandemic. Moving to the next page, Your Excellencies, Ranostayo has... Yes, Your Excellencies.
Do you just mean here? Do you just mean that any country shouldn't follow the WHO suggestions related to the pandemic, which has happened here, because this kind of pandemic related to health, which is under WHO area. Do you mean here that any country shouldn't follow shouldn't follow forward to what the WHO say or suggestions regarding the regulation for each country?
Yes, Your Excellencies, I do know your concern, but Your Excellencies, as I mentioned before, the travel restriction of the WHO regulation, it's not a kind of hard law. It's not a kind that article that we have legally binding as a state, because the travel restriction or the export of travel restriction is under Article 15 of the International Health Regulation, Your Excellencies. Yes, we also, as a state, is respect to international law and respect to international health regulation, and we are as a member of WHO. But Your Excellencies, under Article 1 of the International Health Regulation, it states that the terms of Article 15 about the travel restriction is a kind of non-binding advice from the WHO. So Ranasayo as a state, it was not legally binding for that terms, because it was just an advice from the organization, and it's not a kind of law that we have to obey to do that kind of regulation. May I continue?
You shall proceed.
Yes, Your Excellencies, moving to the next page, Ranostaya has no obligation to compensate the economic losses because Aprilia didn't confirm and notify WHO about employees in NBL are infected by COVID-19 virus under International Health Regulation Article 6, Paragraph 1, Your Excellencies. Aprilia didn't respect the international law by not report the employees in NBL who are suspect the COVID-19 to WHO. Also, Aprilia hide this information, and Ranostayo government disappointed because there's so many Ranostayan in Segura province. Therefore, Aprilia shall be revert to the International Court of Justice in conformity with the statute of the court as the consequence concerning not honor to WHO Constitution under Article 75, Your Excellencies.
Agent,
Yes,
yeah,
Your Excellencies.
based on what I read from the mood problem, I've seen that here Aprilia, they already taken action to report to WHO for the cases. So why do you think that they did not do anything about it?
Yes, Your Excellencies, because why Ranosayo view that Aprilia didn't report to the WHO first, because when the NBL member, two NBL member are suspect of COVID-19, the Aprilia didn't do an action to report to the WHO and keep hide the cases itself, Your Excellencies. And we are already know from Miss Formoon, who is categorized as our asylum seeker, application of asylum seeker. So we conclude that that Aprilia didn't do the good faith principle as a state and as a member of WHO to report that kind of two people in NBL are suspect by the COVID-19 virus, Your Excellencies. May I continue?
But they reported the case. They didn't report before because it was not yet fully fully examined, right? But after that, they reported to WHO. So in which procedure you're trying to say that, oh, they have to report this case even before investigation of or any test in the country?
Yes, Your Excellencies, because this is a global pandemic or categorized as emergency health. Ranostayo view that this kind of suspect person have to report by the WHO first, even if the final test is final test is have a right and positive or negative of a suspect person, but in a good faith of a state, it should appropriate to notify WHO about the condition in their state itself, Your Excellencies. May I continue?
Yes.
The second submission is regarding to Ranosayo didn't violate international law by refusing to hand over Ms. Kenbak Forman to appropriate authorities. Your Excellencies, there are three main arguments proving that Ranosayo didn't violate international law. The first, extradition law prohibits Ranosayo to hand over Ms. Forman to appropriate from her political offense. And the second, the human rights of Ms. Forman was protected by international law. And the third, Ms. Forman information protects public interest. Your Excellencies, Ms. Kenbak Forman is appropriate national born and raised in Segura province. She is the NBL member and signed the NBL non-disclosure agreement on 10 April 2018. But on 3 June 2018, Ms. Forman sent the information of disclosure of JV-18 cases in Apeplia by the Twitter account. Secret, the government of Apeplia keep denying about the cases that already exist. According to her post, the Apreplian police chased her and she drove through the front gates of Ranostayo's consulate in Segura province. At that time, the consul agreed to let she stay in unused room in the consulate building and become an asylum seeker of Ranostayo. I will proceed to my first argument, Your Excellencies, regarding to extradition law prohibit Ranostayo to hand over Ms. Forman to Apeplia from her political offense. Your Excellencies, the act of Ms. Forman was categorized as a political offense since she against the government of Apeplia through her Twitter, prejudiced her state system of information of JV-18. The cases of JV-18 in Apeplia was hid by the government in Segura province. So Ms. Forman against her government to say the truth about the cases of JV-18, and also she against the government by didn't obey the agreements between employers in NBL about a non-disclosure agreement. Your Excellencies, may I introduce you what NBL is? NBL is a public laboratory of Apeplia under the government of Apeplia authorities or Apeplia government, Your Excellencies. And extradition cannot apply by the act of political offense according to the Article 33(1) of the Convention and Protocol relating to the status of refugee and customary international law. The article stipulates that no contracting state shall expel or return a refugee in any manner whatsoever to the frontiers of territories where his life or freedom will be threatened on account of his political opinion. Your Excellencies, both Apeplia and Ranostayo are the parties of this convention, and thereafter, neither Apeplia and Ranostayo have the reservation about the terms of Article 33(1). Your Excellencies, and also the Swiss representative said that his government had all times applied this principle stated in that article. Your Excellencies, further, according to the Model Treaty on Extradition adopted by General Assembly Resolution 45 under Article 3, mandatory grounds for refusal extradition to the political offense, and if the request state has substantial grounds for believing that the request for extradition has been made for the purpose of prosecuting or punishing a person on account of that people race, religion, nationality, ethnic origin, and political opinion. Your Excellencies, Ms. Forman, who did the political offense, must be not handed over to Apeplia by Ranostayo because according to the General Assembly resolution that I mentioned before, Ranostayo cannot expel her and she cannot be returned to Apeplia. Thus, Ranostayo, as a state respect to the international law, protects her life from the persecution of Apeplia itself, Your Excellencies. It also drawn by the case of Edward Joseph Snowden in the reflection of the protects the asylum from the political offense. Your Excellencies, to conclude, Ranostayo believed that Aprilia had purpose to prosecute Miss Furman because of her information about the case of COVID-18 in NBL, and Ranostayo will continue to evaluate the case because there is impossible to say that Miss Furman commits crime because of her statement. Your Excellencies, so for the foregoing, yes, Your Excellencies.
Before you proceed, I want to know what kind of legal basis here that you use for that the state of Ranostayo have a right to let Miss Formont to stay in your consulate office due to that she is none of your, I mean, due to that she is not a Ranostayo citizens. And here, doesn't you think that Republic of Aprilia have the right to ask the Ranostayo's consulate to hand it their citizens based on to proceed for the criminal things that she do.
Yes, Your Excellencies, but my time is about to expire. Is it possible to me to answer your question? Yes, I continue to answer your question, Your Excellencies. Yes, Ms. Farman is the nationality of Aprilia, and Ms. Farman do the crime as a breach non-disclosure agreement in Aprilia. But according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights under Article 14, Ranostayo as a state and as a member of the as the United Nations respect to the international law about the humanity, and under the Article 14, everyone has the right to seek and enjoy another state as asylum, Your Excellencies. And also, Ranostayo accept her from to our asylum seeker because she already in our territorial and our consul or in our consul in Segura province, Your Excellencies. Yes, the consul is doesn't have a jurisdiction to accept the asylum seeker because the consulate is just categorized as private sector, but according to the state practice, the one of United States of America, actually the consulate cannot process the application of granting an asylum or refugee under the convention that I mentioned before. But the consulate can over the application of the asylum seeker to our foreign minister in the Ranostayo authorities itself, Your Excellencies. It is clear, Your Excellencies, or?
Okay, you may proceed.
Yes, Your Excellencies, for the foregoing reason, respondent respectfully requests that the court find its favor to adjudge and declare that Ranostayo didn't violate international law by applying its entry regulation to Aprilia, and even if it did, it should not be required Aprilia for any claim of economic losses, and Ranostayo didn't violate international law by refusing to hand over Ms. Kenbak Formun to the Aprilian authorities. Thank you, Your Excellencies.
We might proceed for the next respondent.
Okay. Very good afternoon, Your Excellencies and the agent of United Republic of Aprilia. My name is Cjessup Akbar. It is the honor to appear before this court representing on behalf of the Democratic State of Ranostayo as respondent in this case concerning the COVID-19 pandemic between Aprilia and Ranostayo, where I will speak for the next 20 minutes and I will address our third and fourth submissions regarding to the court may exercise jurisdiction over Ranostayo's counterclaim concerning the maintained airways aircraft and Aprilia violated international law by shooting down the aircraft. Your Excellencies, with your permissions, I will begin to deliver from our third submissions and may it please the court. The problem emerged when Ms. Furman, who already an applicant for asylum seeker to Ranostayo, is intended to manage to get away from the territory of Aprilia, but in the process, her airplane was shot down by the Air Force of Aprilia. the reason for shooting down that aircraft is because they believe to protect possible terrorist action to their capital city. But the recording of the crashed airplane showed that Miss Furman and her friend Miss Wei never intended to use that airplane for terrorist actions. Rather than they only want to get away from the territory of Papua. Because of this, Your Excellencies, we declare that in our third submissions, the court may exercise jurisdiction over an obstacle counterclaim concerning the maintained aircraft. Your Excellencies, in these submissions consist of two main arguments, where in the first argument, the court has jurisdictions under Article 36 Statute of the International Court of Justice, and in the second argument, the court has jurisdiction over an abstaining interest on the counterclaim. In our first argument, the court has jurisdiction under Article 36 Statute of the International Court of Justice. Your Excellencies, under Article 36, Paragraph 1 Statute of the ICJ, where it provides, I quote, the jurisdiction of the court comprises all cases which the parties refer to it and all matters specially provided for it in the Charter of the Nations or in the treaties and convention in force, unquote, where Your Excellencies, based on the statement of fact on the 17th August of 2020, both Apre and Ranapstayo agree to have this dispute to proceed in the ICJ, and this is already fulfilled based on the Article 36, Paragraph 1 Court Statute. Moreover, Your Excellencies, the court may also be granted jurisdiction over disputes arising from international treaties where such treaties contain a compromissory clause. Providing for this, in fact, quite a large number of international treaties, both bilateral and multilateral, do include a clause awarding the ICJ jurisdiction with respect to questions that might arise from the interpretation and application of the agreement. Your Excellencies, the court still has jurisdiction based on the declaration of Apre and Ranapstayo on the 7th January 2002 and March 2003. Apre and Ranapstayo on 7th January 2002 and March 2003 had respectively deposited declarations with the Secretary General of the United Nations under Article 36, Paragraph 2 of the Statute of the ICJ. Both declare that accepting ICJ jurisdiction as compulsory ipso facto and without special agreement. Your Excellencies, if there is a question that the court does not have jurisdiction because of reservations, it may still have jurisdiction on another basis. A limitation on the court jurisdiction under a compromissory clause, but not in the declaration, does not affect the declarations. Moreover, Your Excellencies, Article 93, Paragraph 1 of the Charter of United Nations stipulate that all members of United Nations are ipso facto parties to the Statute of the International Court of Justice. The court, Your Excellencies, has jurisdiction regarding to Ranapstayo counterclaim. Because why? The shooting down of the maintained aircraft is actually violated international law by shooting down the maintained airways, Your Excellencies. In this, my second subpoint of argument, the action of shooting down the maintained airways are violated the Chicago Convention 1944 in the Article 3 bis A, where it states that each state must refrain from using weapons against civilian aircraft. Moreover, that the appropriate action on shooting down the maintained airways aircraft is also violated Article 2, Paragraph 4 of Charter of the United Nations, as state that prohibit all the use of force. And, Your Excellencies, in the Article 1 state that every internationally wrongful act of a state entails the international responsibility of that state. So, Your Excellencies, we state that Apre actions toward shooting down the maintained airways is indeed violated international law, especially in the Chicago Convention on Article 3 bis A and Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the United Nations Charter. And also considering the fact that Ms. Furman, which is one of our applicants for asylum, is also our interest, and Apre action for shooting down that aircraft is absolutely fall under the jurisdiction of this court, Your Excellencies. Moving to our fourth submissions. Regarding to Apre violated international law by shooting down the aircraft. Your Excellencies, every civilian aircraft is under protection of the Convention of International Civil Aviation. The actions that was taken by Apre to shooting down maintained airways aircraft is indeed violating international law, where on the Article 3 bis A, as I mentioned above, that stipulate the prohibition of use of force from state to use of force to civilian aircraft. And that's why allow me to deliver you and our arguments in these four submissions consists of two main arguments, where in the first arguments we state that Apre is violated international law for shutting down the Malaysian Airways, and in the second argument, the right to life of every person on board of Malaysian Airways. Your Excellencies, in our first argument in these four submissions, we state that Aprilia is violated international law for shutting down the Malaysian Airways. Why? Because the prohibition of using air force against civilian aircraft. Because, Your Excellencies, there are prohibitions of armed forces against civilian aircraft follows as an international norm, where until 1928, the use of force was a natural component of state sovereignty. But to be noted that and that year also became the first convention established the non-use of force, which the name of the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which was a principle regulating international relations, a rule that's also taken up by the Charter of the United Nations and upheld by the International Court of Justice. Most of the legal theorists consider that, Your Excellencies, the non-use of weapons as a peremptory norm of international law, also called jus cogens. This principle has indeed, Your Excellencies, an impact on civil aviation to the extent that a state may not use armed forces against commercial aircraft, where because of the protection from the Kellogg-Briand Pact, there is an addendum to Article 3 of the Chicago Conventions of 7 December 1944 established, Your Excellencies, the specific protection for civilian aircraft. Allow me to quote that the contracting state recognized that every state must refrain from resorting to the use of weapons against civil aircraft in flight, and that in the case of interceptions, the lives of persons on board and safety of aircraft must not be in danger, unquote. Moreover, Your Excellencies, the United Nations General Assembly took up the convention precept by asking all states to take the necessary steps to avoid incidents involving attacks on civil aircraft that accidentally stray from their fixed route. Similarly, Your Excellencies, the International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, on several occasions has upheld the principle of protecting civil aircraft, where they state that the Assembly condemns all acts of violence which may be directed against aircraft, aircraft crews, and passengers engaged in the international air transport. Also, Your Excellencies, the United Nations Security Council Resolution number 1067 provide that to condemn the use of weapons against civil aircraft is in flight as being incompatible with elementary consideration of humanity, the rule of customary international law as codified in the addendum to the Article 3 of the Chicago Conventions. Additionally, Your Excellencies, in order to make the principle of non-use of force weapons more effective, the Chicago Convention provide for launching an investigation in case of the destruction of a civilian aircraft. Although, Your Excellencies, based on the statement of fact that Aprilia still managed to investigate the crash of Malaysian Airways as regulated in the Chicago Convention, but, Your Excellencies, the recording of the plane shown that the passenger of Malaysian Airways is clearly not intended to use their aircraft as terrorist actions, rather than just want to get out from the territory of Aprilia airspace. This is clearly degrading of human rights of the person in board, and the action that was took by Aprilia is frivolous and are indeed violated international law. Next, Your Excellencies, in the use of lethal force against Malaysian Airways is excessive. Because why? Your Excellencies, allow me to tell you why the use of lethal force against Malaysian Airways is excessive, because there is a comparison case regarding to these issues, where the most significant of these are the brother to the rescue case, in which Cuban forces shut down a small civilian plane that had allegedly violated Cuban airspace. And also the case of Nachova versus Bulgaria, in which person who were shut down while trying to escape. Your Excellencies, to be noted that this case did not concern events in situation of armed conflict or even in the peacetime, because Because of this kind of comparison issues can be proportionality principle will apply at all time regarding to the case of the Malaysian Airways. Your Excellency, the finding that the use of lethal force was excessive was explained in the Nachova case judgment in the following term. I quote, there can be no necessity to put human life at risk where it is known that the person to be arrested poses no threat to life or limb and is not suspected of having committed a violent offense, even if a failure to use lethal force may result in the opportunity to arrest the fugitive being lost. This judgment, Your Excellencies, is actually relating in the case of the maintain Airways aircraft. Why? Because as known that Ms. Furman and Ms. Wei was using civilian aircraft to get away from the territory of Apripulia because they want to take asylum in the territory of Ranmustayo, but in the process, her airplane was shot down because the Apripulia authority believed that their airplane was used for terrorist action, while based on the statement of fact, also that the black box of the plane shows that that airplane never used intended for terrorist action. So moreover, we state that Maintain Airways to be considered is a civilian aircraft, not a state aircraft, and it must be considered as a non-threat, Your Excellencies. Even if Apripulia deemed as a threat to their nations, Apripulia only play based on their assumption, and such assumption is danger in the case when the lack of evidence. Also, Your Excellencies, international law never universally accept to recognize based on the preemptive attack, and thus Apripulia action to use lethal force is excessive and must be responsible at all costs. Your Excellencies, in my
So, since you said that the action was excessive, what is it the procedure that armed forces should do first in order to recognize whether this airplane does not belong to the terrorist organization? Is there any regulation that can support your statement?
Yes, Your Excellencies, I understand your concern. That's why, Your Excellency, there is the Chicago Conventions, which provide us protecting the civilian aircraft. Because, Your Excellencies, as many times as I mentioned, that the action of Apripulia is excessive. Why? Because we must consider the civilian aircraft as a non-threat. Because, Your Excellencies, in the recording of the plane shows that the conversation between Miss Furman and Miss Wei state that they state that they only want to get away from the territory of Apripulia, but sadly, Your Excellencies, there is a malfunction in their airplane that stipulate their radio conversation is broken, so they cannot communicate to the fighter jet pilot of Apripulia. So that's why they are shooting down. Because of this, Your Excellencies, if only that Apripulia never used force against Ms. Verman aircraft, then we will not having be here in this the ICG, because there is a comparison case, as I mentioned in the Nachova case judgment, that the judge at that time stated that there is no necessity to put human life at risk, even if a failure to use lethal force may result in the opportunity to arrest the fugitive being lost. To be exact, that Your Excellencies, Article 5 of the Chicago Convention provide the right of non-scheduled airplane to to become protect under the Convention of the Chicago. Because why? Your Excellency, allow me also to tell you that Miss Furman aircraft was illegal, Your Excellency, was illegal, but the airplane is actually registered under the private company that name Maintain Airways. But even if that airplane was illegal, considered to the Apripulia authority, they can still have right to protect under the Chicago Conventions that stipulate their aircraft must not use a force against from the territory of Apripulia. So, Your Excellencies, that's why we have the Chicago Convention. Chicago Conventions, the purpose itself to protect the civilian aircraft. So, any kind of reason of Apripulia state that they believe there's terrorist action, it is actually contrary to the international convention, especially in this Chicago Convention, Your Excellencies. May I proceed, Your Excellencies? Yes.
Thank
Your
you.
Excellencies, I will move to my second argument, where the right to life of every person on board of maintained airways. Everyone have the right to not be arbitrarily deprived of life. For that, the life of Miss Furman and Miss Wei must be preserved at all costs. The action that was took by Aprilia for shooting down maintained airways is violating Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and therefore Aprilia must be responsible at all costs. Because, Your Excellencies, Article 6 of the ICCPR provides that every person has the right not to be arbitrarily deprived of life, and impose a correlative obligation upon state parties to respect that right and to ensure that persons subject to their jurisdiction are not arbitrarily deprived of their life, because we know that, Your Excellencies, Ms. Perman and Ms. Wei was still under jurisdiction of the Aprilia. So because of they are still under jurisdiction of Aprilia, so Aprilia must preserved in the Article 6 of the ICCPR provide protection to their life, not to arbitrarily deprive of life, while sadly, Aprilia did not do any this obligation under the ICCPR. So, Your Excellencies, please,
Agent.
yes, Your Excellencies.
So in order to protect the country from, because at that time the country has this terrorist emergency, and they need to take some military action if there is an alien movement in the country. So, however, you try to argue that there is this prohibition of arbitrary, general legal prohibition of arbitrary killing by the agent of the state. So, what is it? What belongs to arbitrary killing?
Yes.
Because this action can be we can regard this action to protect the country itself, but
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Your Excellencies, thank you, and I understand your concern. Your Excellencies, that's why there is still obligation to Aprilia to protect the civilian aircraft, because in the Article 89 of the Chicago Convention did not make any distinctive in the peaceful time or even emergency time. Every state parties in the Chicago Convention in the Article 89 especially tell us that a state still must protect the civilian aircraft from the use of force. Moreover, Your Excellencies, even if Aprilia thinks that misformandate that is the cause of the protecting of their country, they still must be responsible, Your Excellency. Why? Because Philip Alston, writing an United Nations Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary execution, summarily rejects that the possibility that might accept as lawful any deaths of innocent person that are incidental to a targeted killing in a law enforcement context, while we know that, Your Excellencies, mispermandate is because in the context of the law enforcement, that Philip Alston state, I quote, killing of anyone other than the target or family members or other in the vicinity, for example, will be an arbitrary deprivation of life under human rights law and could result in a state responsibility and individual criminal liability, unquote. The opinion of the International Court of Justice also, Your Excellency, in the legality of the threat or use of nuclear weapons might also be understood as further authority for the provision that human rights law does not allow for incidental deaths of innocent person in a law enforcement context. Thus, Your Excellencies, if Aprilia state that their action for shooting down maintained airways is incidental or in the context of law enforcement, let's just say, that kind of action or that kind of excuse must not be acceptable, Your Excellencies. And therefore, whatever the reason of Aprilia state, Aprilia must be responsible at all costs, Your Excellencies.
Agent, you have 2 minutes time to conclude.
Yes. Thank you, Your Excellencies. That's why in our prayer for relief, Ranavstayu requests that the court adjudge and declare that the court may exercise jurisdiction over Ranavstayu counterclaim concerning the maintained airways aircraft and Aprilia violated international law by shooting down the aircraft. Thank you, Your Excellencies.
Sorry, ini ada rebuttal, rebuttal? Enggak kan?
Enggak ada.
Oh iya.
Belum ada, Kak.
Proceed dong. Proceed.
Aku lupa di sini kita ngapain?
Bang Ari.
Ya, langsung ke ini kan, langsung ke timekeeper-nya, langsung minta hakimnya keluar gitu kan ya?
Maaf.
Bang Ari?
Iya, langsung